Maybe you're here because your provider has recommended an induction, or perhaps you were induced for a previous pregnancy and you don't want to repeat that experience. Either way, I imagine the thought of an induction has you feeling anxious, overwhelmed, and worried about your baby and yourself. I get it. It's hard to sift through the research and understand your options and what it all means. Plus, who has the time? Well, take a deep breath because I got your back. Let's get into it. Hi, I'm Kelly, your online doula, educator, and #1 fangirl for all things birth. In this channel, I teach you how to avoid unnecessary medical interventions and how to get empowered and ready for your birth. The #1 way to avoid an unnecessary labor induction is to know the difference between what is medically necessary versus what is an elective reason for an induction. When you know your provider's why, you can take the time to get informed and make a decision that's best for you and best for baby. Induction rates are increasing in the US, where anywhere between 23 and 41% of people are induced for labor in the United States. Now that's a really big range. The studies are kind of all over the place. But to break it down, in 1990, we were only at 12%. So without doubt, the rates are increasing. We first have to understand why. Why are these rates increasing? Well, there's two main reasons. #1, more people are choosing an elective induction. So an induction that has nothing to do with anything medical that's happening, but more out of convenience or comfort. So reasons could look like getting past your due date, or just having a feeling of being done, or inducing around a schedule, maybe your provider's schedule or your schedule. These are some elective reasons. And that's just become a little bit more popular over the last few years. The second reason is a study called the ARRIVE study, which was published in 2018. This study gave providers grounds to be able to recommend a labor induction at 39 weeks to lower the chance of a cesarean. But what I'm seeing as a doula is that when this is said, the provider isn't taking the time to actually break down the findings of that study, looking a little bit closer at the numbers, and also outlining the benefits and risks of an induction. So, let me help you break it down. This study found that there was no difference between being induced at 39 weeks or waiting to go into spontaneous labor in the overall health of the baby. So babies didn't improve or have any adverse effects from induction at 39 weeks. But what they did find is that those who were induced at 39 weeks had a slightly lower rate of cesarean than those who waited for spontaneous labor. The difference is 19% of the induction group ended up in cesarean versus 22% of the non-induction group ended up in cesarean. That's right, a 3% difference between the groups. The study also found that the induction group had a lower rate of high blood pressure than the group that waited for spontaneous labor. The difference was 9% versus 14%. And lastly, the study found that those who were induced had longer hospital stays than those who were not. It's really important to look at the data here and determine if that variability between the induction group and the non-induction group warrants enough grounds to outweigh the risks of a labor induction. Each provider is going to have their own opinion on this, as can you. So now let's look at the difference between medically necessary reasons for induction, which are typically urgent, versus elective versus the gray area conditions. So starting with medically necessary reasons for induction, the research at this time clearly indicates that once baby is full term, which is around 37 weeks, it is safer for baby to be outside of the body versus in the body. Therefore, induction is highly, highly recommended, or cesarean at this point. I want to pull out one example that you see here, which is high blood pressure. This is one of the most common reasons I see a person moving from a low-risk pregnancy to a high-risk pregnancy, high blood pressure at the end of pregnancy. So what are the doctors actually concerned about? Well, they're concerned about your high blood pressure turning into preeclampsia, which is a very serious condition. This is something that can happen really fast and be quite urgent. I want to also tell you a story about a client of mine who was faced with the decision to induce due to high blood pressure. At her 37-week appointment, she went in and had a high blood pressure reading. Now, backing up, she never felt comfortable with these providers. They always made her feel anxious or unheard or just silly for asking questions. And every single time she went to the appointment, she felt just really nervous and put on the spot. So when she had a high blood pressure reading at her 37-week appointment and they told her she immediately needed to go to the hospital, she was really, really panicked, confused, and not totally convinced. In the end, she decided to go home instead of going to the hospital, and on the way to have her partner pick her up a blood pressure reading machine to take her blood pressure at home. She wanted to be sure that her blood pressure was in fact high and wasn't due to an external variable like stress, intimidation, or those kinds of things. When she got home, she monitored her blood pressure for the rest of the day, and her readings were high. After talking it over with her partner and me as her doula, and just getting some more evidence that she was in fact having high blood pressure, she made the informed, conscious decision to go to the hospital that evening and go ahead and let the induction process begin. By taking this extra step to pause, reflect, gather more information, talk it out, she had far more ownership over her decision to induce and was mentally and physically more prepared to show up for the induction. Her induction story was really positive and ended up in a beautiful vaginal birth. Moving on to elective reasons for induction. So over here is the list. Some of this we've already discussed. None of these reasons listed here are medically necessary reasons to have an induction on its own. I want to point out going past your due date. Going past your due date is not reason enough to induce. This is an elective reason, not medically necessary. It can become medically necessary if one of those other variables are there in addition to going past your due date. Now let's get into the trickier stuff, the gray area reasons for labor induction. So, seeing this list over here, you can see that all of these conditions listed here, the evidence is really mixed on if labor induction is actually necessary for these situations. If your provider is recommending induction for any of these reasons, they are doing so based on their comfort zone and experience, not because the evidence tells them explicitly that there is an urgent reason to induce once baby is full term. This is a gray area, and if your condition falls in this category, I highly encourage you to take the time to do some extra research on what we know about inducing for these conditions. The best place to get the most up-to-date research is evidencebasedbirth.com. They are my go-to source for all medical, scientific, evidence-based, peer-reviewed research out there around birth and inductions and anything that the hospital could recommend. If you like these tips and want to know more, I've linked my free download, How to Avoid an Unnecessary Labor Induction, in the description, and I have it linked right here. Next week's video is going to be all about natural labor induction methods. So make sure to like and subscribe so that you don't miss out.